Adonai orive ishi mimi ira. Adonai maoz chai mimi efchad. Adonai orive ishi mimi ira. Adonai maoz chai mimi efchad. Shema Adonai koli ekra. Shema o Adonai koli ekra. Vekoneni va'eneni. Lecha ramar lebi b'kei shufenai. Lecha ramar lebi b'kei shufenai. Et panecha Adonai avokesh. Et panecha Adonai avokesh. Adonai ori. Adonai ori. Welcome to Hebrew Perspectives. So glad to be with you here this week in our Torah study. For those of you that are new, pardon me. For those of you that are new, we do a Torah study every week. What we do can be found in the description of the YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for joining us. Sorry for the delay, a little bit of a technical delay. And then on Facebook, each week we post on Sunday. Each week on the first day of the week, we post the readings, and so that you can follow along. And then on Facebook, we also post the aliyah each day. Aliyah means in Hebrew means to go up, as in to go up to read. The master, he went up to read. Remember in Luke 4:16, he went up to read. This is what we do. We do this on a regular basis. We go up to read every morning. My wife and I, we sit and we read the aliyah. We read that portion for that day, that aliyah for that day. And we follow a Torah portion, the exact portion that the Messiah and his disciples, his Talmudim, would have followed. Today we're going to talk about a call to holiness, a call to holiness. This week's Torah portion is called Emor. Emor simply means say. Simply means say. And so before we get started here, again, just a Torah basic for those of you that are new. Torah means instruction. Torah is the Hebrew word for instruction. I find it interesting that when some people find out that you're Jewish, they think that you're reading from a different book. They'll even ask the question of, hey, where can I get one of these Torah? And the simple answer to that is, do you have a Bible? Yes. Well, the Torah is the first 5 books. And there you have it. So that's the book that everyone else has based their religions on. And so it's as easy as that. It's the same book, folks, only it comes from a Hebrew interpretation. I say this often. We read a Hebrew book. We follow Hebrew heroes such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we serve a Hebrew God. Hebrew is his language. And the Messiah, he was Jewish as well. Hebrew, Jew, Israelite, these words are all synonymous. Every once in a while, I get told that I'm not a real Jew. I just find that interesting. It's the root of that is anti-Semitism. Uh, uh, Good to see. Shabbat Shalom to those of you that are joining in. And let's get started by reading the blessing. And the blessing, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Adonai, our God, sweeten the words of Torah in our mouth and in the mouth of your people, the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people Israel. Blessed are you, Adonai, King of the universe, who selected us from all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah. And as the blessing says, may Torah study always be sweet to you. Last week we talked about, well, actually, I think I was talking to somebody else, talking about the whole thing of being chosen. Chosen to do what? Chosen to bring people under the wings of the Shekinah, to bring people to the covenant of the one true God. And that's what we're all about. That's what we're talking about here. So a call to holiness today is what we're talking about. And we have, again, the Torah portion is Emor, which means say. So if we read in the Hebrew here in this first line, it says, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe Emor. Emor is the word say. And so for those of you that are new, the Torah portion is usually named after the first few words or words in the in the Hebrew, so that it helps to find it easily, especially when when we look at Hebrew. Remember Hebrew, originally everything was one long line of words. It wasn't until later that people separated them out and put vowels in there to help for people to be able to read it easier. But really, I'm getting my master's in Hebrew, and again, and so, and one of the things my Hebrew teacher was telling me was that after a while, and this is true, this is very true. I noticed that he was saying it was true, and I'm reiterating it to you so that you can understand this. That you just see a word, and you don't need the vowel points. You know what that word is, and this Torah portion, and along with many other Torah portions, you look at that word, just a simple word like shalom. You see shalom and you know shalom. You don't need the vowel points for it. You know how to say shalom. And so this Torah portion, Emor, is right here, and that's what it's named after. So, Vayomer Adonai El Moshe Emor El Hachonim. So it's talking about, in the English, we're saying, and the Lord said to Moses, say to the Kohanim, say to the priests. All right, so enough of the Hebrew lesson, but it fits in there. It goes in there with what we see, and Coffee Porch Ponderer, you are right. When we are reading the English, yes, there's vowels in the English, but when we look at the word, we know how to say it. English is kind of a crazy language, but it's interesting how even people from other languages, when they first try to learn English, it's really crazy, because English is kind of is different. It's different, but anyway. So let's begin with the Hebrew Gospels. The Hebrew Gospels. So let's go to. If you have the Hebrew Gospels, that's great. It really is. You'd be surprised how wonderful it is to have the Gospels in basically a Jewish Hebrew thought, instead of having it in the Western Greek mindset. The Hebrew Gospels really opens some things up and helps you to understand. And then also, so that when you go back to the Torah, and you go to references in the Torah, new light is shed on those. Insights come from seeing those. and then it becomes sweet to us. It becomes sweet to us. We're in John chapter 6, very, very familiar to us. And I'm going to read a little bit here from it. Now, it's interesting is that we're reading here. Let me start here. Okay, let's start with 6 and verse 28. They said to him, what are we to do to perform the actions of God? Yeshua answered and said to them, this is the action of God, that you believe in the one whom he sent. They said to him, what is the sign that you will do that we will see and believe it? What will you do? Our fathers ate manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Yeshua said to them, amen, amen. I say to you, Moshe did not give you bread from heaven, for my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is what comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They said to him, my master, always give us this bread. Yeshua said to them, I am the bread of life. Anyone who comes to me will not be hungry, and one who believes in me will not thirst again. Now I have said to you that you have even beheld me, but you will not believe. All those that my Father gives me will come to me, and I will not shove out the one who comes to me. For I have not come down from heaven to do my will, but the will of the one who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that none who have been given to me will be lost to me, but rather I will raise him on the last day. This is the will of the one who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him will have eternal life, and I will raise him on the last day. Now, if we look, somehow I'm missing a book, and that's all right. So if you want to reference later, you can go to Nehemiah 9 and 15 and look at that and read that correlation. You also notice that our Torah portion, our half Torah portion, let me explain that for those of you that are new. Not only do we put out the Torah portion for each week, but there's also what's known as the half Torah portion. It usually comes from the writings of the prophets. And the reason why that was done was that when Israel was carried away to Babylon, and where they were not allowed to study Torah, but they were allowed to have the prophets and the Psalms. And so looking at the prophets and Psalms, they easily found portions in the half Torah, in the Psalms and in the prophets, that fit with what the Torah portions were. Now remember, these Torah portions, if you do the same things over and over and over again through repetition, you're going to know these things. And so it was very helpful to those that were in exile to Babylon. And Ezekiel was the prophet to the exiles. And so this week's half Torah portion comes from Ezekiel. And Ezekiel is really, really, really good. Some people find it confusing, but it's an awesome book. I suggest you go back and you read to it with the knowledge of the Torah that you have. Again, what I was just saying, if people were doing the same repetition over and over and over again, these Torah portions, when you go to read in the half Torah, in the prophets and the Psalms, you see new things that you did not see before. God gives insights to you that you did not see before. And so here we have this bread, the bread of life, the Messiah. He's also making references to Ezekiel here, and this all fits. It fits really well. So this brings us to there's a story, the story of in Egypt, and it comes from Chizkuni. Chizkuni was his name was Hezekiah ben Manoah. Is basically Hezekiah, the son of Manoah. He was a 13th century Torah scholar, and he was well known at that time. And he basically took the commentary, the Peshat commentary of Rashi. Remember, Peshat means surface level. Rashi was a commentator from around just before him, and so he was able to do that. And then this Hiskuni, what he did was he wrote an interpretation based on that, and his references go back to the Talmud, to the Mishnah and the Gemara. Again, those are names of the Talmud. Those are things that are in the Talmud, and we do look at the Talmud here. We do this on a regular basis, is because it's exactly what the Messiah did. There's just so many references to it. I've got 2 books here. I mean, look how thick these things are. These are just commentary of Talmudic references that the Messiah and others make in the Gospels. The one book is just the book of Matthew, and pardon me. So now I chased a little bit of rabbit on that, but the point is we were talking about Hiskuni and references to this, and so you can see here that the Messiah talking about the bread, talking about the manna, talking about bread coming from heaven, basically talking about a spiritual bread. Bread is very mundane. But bread is the source of life, right? We pray, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav aleichem haaretz. Bless you, Lord God. I think I said it wrong, but the point is, the blessing is, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. I have to slow down a little bit. I get excited. Forgive me, folks. I get excited about Torah. Torah is, it's life. It is. So, again, what's going on here is that I'm making some references from the master. He's talking about bread. He's talking about manna. He's teaching people that are coming to him. And in Egypt, here's a story I wanted to share with you. And this comes from Hiskuni. All this, I said all of that, just lead back right to here. So in Egypt, Egypt in Hebrew is known as Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means constricted. It means constricted. So Egypt was a constricted place. We were constricted and confined in Egypt. Interesting how we went to a place. But anyway, so in Egypt, there was a woman named Shlomis Bas Devri. Her husband, Neriah, the grandson of Dan, was beaten to death by an Egyptian taskmaster with whom she produced a child. Now, this child was among those who left Mitzrayim. Remember, there was, out of the 3 million people that left, 2.4 million of them were strangers. They were Egyptians. They were people that were leaving. Remember, 80% of Jewish people actually stayed behind, and to their detriment. If that doesn't speak to some of the things that Messiah said, many are called, but few are chosen, that tells you something. So the tribe of Dan. So this child, he was among those that left Egypt. As his mother's husband was from the tribe of Dan, he sought a place of encampment among them. Okay, so he left his mother's encampment where he was. That's lineage follows the mother. Okay, he'd been just fine if he had stayed with his mother. However, he was rebuffed by his half brother, a true member of the tribe of Dan, and so thus he belonged to no tribe, just like the convert to Judaism. And that comes from Rashi as commentary. It's an interesting note. So, and I've tried to express this to someone here recently, that if we look at the patterns that we find in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah, we look at those patterns, we can see those patterns being fulfilled in the Messiah and in the Gospels. And that the patterns are the patterns of what we call being saved, right? So, but the patterns that we see here is that one of the patterns, there's so many patterns, it's hard to see them all. This is why we study Torah, to look for these insights. But talking about the tribes here and about how they were camped around the Ark of the Covenant, there's only one covenant. Okay, that's why it was called the Ark of the Covenant. There's not multiple covenants. There's only one. There's only one God, one covenant, one people. All right. And so right here, the people at Mount Sinai, the 2.4 million, everyone embraced the Torah. Everyone embraced the Torah. But the only details that we don't have is these new members, what tribe were they assigned to? We don't know exactly. Obviously, they intermarried and mingled. Why? Why could they do that? Because they were converts. They converted. They could be a part of a tribe. And so after that point of Mount Sinai, remember, we're working our way up to Shavuot, to Pentecost right now. We're working our way up to that point. We count the 26th Omer tonight. So 25, we're halfway through. Today is the 25th day. We count 26 tonight. And so we're on our way to Shavuot. We're on our way to Pentecost. And after that point, there is no mention of a mixed multitude because everyone converted. So when we look at the pattern of the tribes and how they're camped around the Ark of the Covenant, we see that there are 12 tribes. There isn't a camp for the mixed multitude. There isn't a camp of the Gentiles. Why? Because there is no Gentiles. There are no Gentiles. Everyone is now a tribal member of one of the 12 tribes. See how that kind of makes sense. You see the pattern there. And that makes sense for a pattern later on. For us, there's only one God, only one covenant. All right. So now the story continues on. Every Erev Shabbat, that's the night, the eve of Shabbat on Friday night, 12 loaves were baked. They were displayed on the shulchan, that is the table of showbread, in the Mishkan, that's the tabernacle, for 9 days. After that, they were distributed and eaten by the Kohanim on Shabbat. So, displayed for 9 days. They came hot out of the kiln and thrown onto the put onto the table, and they sat there for 9 days. All right. Now, this man, who obviously, from the way he was treated, remember, we're supposed to treat a stranger as if they're one of us. And there's people that are born into it, and then there's people that come in. And the people that come in are to be very well taken care of. 36 times God talks about in the Torah about how to take care of the stranger. It's that important to him. It's like A1 sauce. It's that important, okay? So this man who obviously was feeling spurned, he mocked this system. He said, "It is the manner of kings to eat hot bread every day. Is this the proper way to honor one's king, to serve him cold fare?" He invoked, now this comes from the Midrash Tenkuma, that part right there I was just reading to you, okay? So he invoked the name of God, the one that was revealed to the Jewish nation at Mount Sinai, and he cursed. Okay, so this is a big problem. Okay, this is a big problem. This is one of the reasons why the name, people are going around trying to pronounce the name of God all the time. Please, please do not do that. I realize God has given us the capacity to be able to do whatever we want. And our whole purpose is to stop doing whatever we want. We need to be following the will of God, and the will of God is the Torah of God. All right. So he said the name and he cursed. Although he was not giving hasra'ah, hasra'ah in Hebrew is warning, God commanded that he be stoned by all those who heard his words. This comes from Meshech Chachma in Vayikra 24:23, commentary on Leviticus 24 and 23. And so, directly following the execution, God commanded Moshe to speak to the Jewish nation on the topic of Shemitah. And Shemitah in the Hebrew is basically it's the sabbatical year, the 7 years. 6 years you plant and harvest, seventh you let it rest. Now this is interesting because so why in particular, why did the service of the lechem pa'anim, that is the bread that we're talking about here, the show bread, as many of it is often interpreted, why did this arouse the ire of God? Remember, God is a loving God. He holds back his wrath, but he is not opposed to he himself making an example and giving commandments. This has led many people to believe that God is very harsh, that he's that harsh God of the Old Testament. Harsh. That's why we have grace now in the New Testament. No, there was lots of grace happening. Just look at what happened with Adam and Eve. Just look at what happened with the golden calf. Lots of grace and mercy all throughout the Hebrew Bible. Another thing we might want to ask is, in what way is a mockery of the Shabbat connected with using God's name in a form of a curse? Okay, we have that's another good question we could ask of this. So, and then the third question we could ask in reading the story and we're seeing what's going on here is, why in after this story, why does God make it necessary to talk about immersing into the laws of the Shemitah? All right, so let's talk a little bit more about. Let's go to the Midrash. Let's analyze this a little bit. Now, the Midrash tells us in the Midrash again going to his Chuni, Midrash is allegorical stories. Basically, that's what the story that there's allegorical stories that come out, and you've heard me read them before. And the Messiah used them often. Basically, we call them parables, little sermon bites to help people to kind of, it causes them to think. So Midrash is one of those things that helps us to think. So in Chizkuni, the Midrash tells us that the Egyptians were defilers and they sought to defile the Israelites. Now remember, this is one of those things that happen oftentimes in the Hebrew Bible. Basically, it's like we couldn't get them to turn from their God, so we send people from other nations, namely women, to entice them and to get them to turn away from their God. Remember, when it comes to marriage, it is a Torah law that only a Jew can marry a Jew. All right? And that, I want you to think about that. And so if God is going to marry, he's going to marry according to the Torah. All right. So now I know some people have, it's like, oh, what's the problem with that? What about I'm a Gentile? Well, there's a remedy for that. You can become Jewish. Okay. So the Egyptian taskmasters deliberately sought to defile the holiness of the daughters of Israel. Hence, we have this story of this, how this young man came about. Now, again, what is happening here is, so what the Egyptians were trying to do all the time is they were causing causing one to bear a child from an Egyptian, that was basically the ultimate way to infuse the Jewish nation with impurity. Now, this is one of the reasons why, as we're looking at the book of Leviticus, again, it's a book that many people ignore. There's a lot that has to do with purity and impurity. And this doesn't always have to, it doesn't always mean, impurity doesn't always mean sin. Impurity basically is coming in contact with something that you shouldn't. So that's why we've talked about in previous parasha that about sections, portions of the Torah, talking about staying away from improper relationships. This is why these things, all this fits together and comes in a line and comes for us to help us to, and aids us in our character refinement. Remember, we're leading our way and working towards Shavuot, towards Pentecost. So what was it about their culture and their beliefs that they were trying to insert into the nation of Israel? Now, there's two things that stand out about Egyptians that about their culture, what they were trying to do. The first thing is that when you look at Genesis 13 and 10, you'll see that Egypt was considered to be paradise on earth. You've seen the pictures, you've seen the movies, the stories, life on the Nile, sitting back and enjoying a cool drink, and somebody shading you and waving palms over you and keeping you all nice and cool. So every pleasure was there. Every pleasure, every wish that they could have, they got it. They found it. Now the second thing, what is known as the power of kishuf, and kishuf is it's magic, but not the kind of magic that you're thinking about. It's referring to the forces of impurity, those things that we're trying not to assimilate and allow into our lives. Those are what make us impure. Many people look at those things and say, oh, that's not sinful, that's not going to harm you. That's what witches say. There's no harm in following this, doing these little pagan things. They don't hurt you. They don't hurt you. Yes, they do. They bring about an impurity, and it separates you from God, and that's not what we want in our lives. So Egypt seemed to be able to control their own destiny by bending nature to their will. That's what they were trying to do. Isn't that what many people are trying to do nowadays? I mean, just trying to controlling the weather, whatever it may be. There are just so many different things. So the sum total of the Egyptian culture was the opposite of everything that God was trying to reveal in this world. So on the contrary, so the Egyptian, they pointed derisively to, I'm looking for the right thought here, as those who believed that one who must rely on God, they would say, look at us. We have no place for God in our lives. Remember, Pharaoh said, who is this God? He thought himself as being a God, right? Basically, they're saying, here they're saying, and yet we're getting whatever we want. We live in paradise on earth here in Egypt. We're getting whatever we want. We get it whenever we want. And we're getting it through our own abilities and our own powers. And this is a mirror image of what is happening in our world today. They were attempting to draw the world away from its creator. But you know what? But the Jewish people stood in the way. They weren't doing those things. So in other words, they had to infuse that impurity into the Jewish people's lives. So what was one of the things that caused this problem? for the Egyptian people, and that was the Shabbat Shalom. The Shabbat Shalom, or the Shabbat. It was the antithesis of the Egyptian belief system. It went against what they were trying to do, and again, throughout all of history, everyone has trouble. It's, there's lazy Jews. It's not what it was about. It's distinction. Let me tell you something about something. Okay, so there are 8 festivals. Some will tell you that there's only 7. They'll say there's 7 festivals of the Lord, and some even go as far as that they're not Jewish, they're biblical. I have to tell you, biblical and Jewish are the same thing. Okay, but there's actually 8, and why is this? The first one. Well, let's go to number 8. The 8th one, that would make the 8th one Sukkot. If we follow the pattern of the festivals, many people think that Sukkot would be the 7th one. But actually Sukkot, which actually has a really huge drawing of people to Israel during that time. The waving of the lulav, the dancing, the celebrating, the festive meal. Many people equate it to the wedding supper of the Lamb. All right, so you can see why that's very exciting. But it's the 8th festival of new beginnings, of rebirth, new birth, new creatures. These are Jewish concepts that have been around since the festivals began. And the festivals we find here in our Torah portion this week in Leviticus 23, as this goes through them. Holy convocations. And so you can see that's the 8th one, new beginnings. What's the 7th then? The 7th is Yom Kippur. What is Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. We just learned, was it last week that I was talking about this? Yom Kippur is known as the Festival of New Covenant. What does that mean? Remember, the tablets were broken and the same words were put on the new tablets, the new covenant. So it was renewed. So yes, it's the festival of renewed covenant. And then you renewed covenant, and then you go to the 8th one and you celebrate. Rosh Hashanah is the 6th. Why is it the 6th? Because that is the day that man was created. 6 is the number of man. So you can see how these fit. All right. Shavuot would be 5. I'm going to use, but the point is the first festival is Shabbat. The very first one is Shabbat. And many people discount that. They don't put it in there. But let me tell you something. Why was Shabbat given? Shabbat was given shortly after the Exodus from Egypt. Deliverance came and God gave rest. The Messiah says, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. In other words, he's saying he is the one that rescues us, delivers us, and brings us to rest. Now, I went off on a little side thing there, and I'm hoping to get back in. I'm barely into what we're doing here today. This always happens. I might have to skip something. Oh, do we really want to do that? All right, quit wasting time. So we acknowledge that on Shabbat, we acknowledge that God is our creator. This is in the part of the blessings that when I read the blessings last night, and we brought Shabbat in. This was the attestment that he is creator. He's the creator. He's the sustainer of all existence. He's the one that saved us and allowed us to be. So Shabbat is a memorial to our being saved. So if you are not celebrating the Shabbat, what does that say? What is that saying about your salvation? It's something to think about. We throw off the shackles of work and we display our faith that our sustenance does not derive from our own labors. Remember, the Egyptians said, "Hey, we do it. We're the ones that created this." Now we're saying in Shabbat, we're saying it's God that's sustaining us. Isn't that amazing? It really is. So, what did it sustain? It sustained 12 tribes. 12 tribes around the Ark of the Covenant. The aleichem panim, the show bread. It defied the rules of the natural world. How is that possible? Well, you may have thought, as I was telling you about this at the beginning, about how it sat there for 9 days. Does anybody like stale, moldy bread? So it defied the laws of nature. Why is this? Because the aleichem panim was no ordinary bread. It was no ordinary bread. As a matter of fact, according to Rabbeinu Bachya, he talks about it and he says it was connected to its source. The bread was connected to the source, the bread of life. The Messiah saying, "I am the bread of life. I'm the bread that comes down from heaven." So 9 days later, it was as fresh as if it had just come out of the oven. Isn't that amazing? It is. People are, I don't know about all that. you believe so many other miracles that happen, but you're not going to believe that one. Come on. On Mount Sinai, it was revealed that God was not just merely the strongest of all powers, but rather that he was everything. Ein od milvado. You'll hear me say that often. There is nothing but him. Anything that appears to be independent of him is an illusion. It doesn't exist. He's the only one. He's the only power. Everything emanates from him. That is the name of God. This is why it's important that we don't take that name in vain, that we don't use that name unnecessarily, that we do not try to pronounce that name, the name that was revealed at Sinai. Now, according to Rabbi Menachem Siegel, he says a Jew is capable of comprehending that they are part of a greater reality. One does this by nullifying their own sense of self. You've heard me talk about this before. We are others-centered, not self-centered. Every Jew stood at Mount Sinai and clearly understood that God is the only reality. God did not merely teach this, he actually showed the Jews that this was true. He opened up their eyes to the reality behind the veil of this world. As such, we are the only nation that possesses the ability to understand our purpose in this world. We know that we must use our freedom of choice to negate ourselves to the endless source of all, and that the pathway to attain unlimited greatness is through this. There you have it. It's not about us. It's about him. It's all about him. So what are the answers to these questions that we asked? These 3 questions. What are the answers? Well, to the Egyptian was, and you'll see this in the world today. There are people that are just not grasping the concepts. And it's not necessarily their fault. It's basically, it comes down to they know what they don't know what they don't know, because what they've been taught and what has been repetitively put on the plate in front of them for year after year after year. So you have people that are 25, 30, 35, 40 years into what they believe. It's hard for them to see the concepts of God, the mysteries, the secrets that the Messiah talked about in Matthew 13, the things that he alluded to. So the Egyptians, not capable of grasping their own non-existence. It was it was all about them. Narcissism. Their sense of self filled the world. And that's exactly what's happening today. Everything that the Egyptians saw and understood fit into their own selfish worldview. This is why so many people, because they do not look at history, they do not see the cycles, they can easily believe in something that is been repeatedly thrown at them. This is why young people today so easily fall into something, it's even going against Israel. It's a poison. It's a selfishness. So going back to this unfortunate young man that we talked about being the product of Egypt's attempt to contaminate the people of Israel. Basically, what happened is that he failed to see the significance of the aleichem hapanim, the showbread. And how could he? How could he? So he would have to see beyond his perception of the reality of his ability to sustain himself. He would have to change his whole thought process in seeing that God is the only one and he is the only source. But he chose not to do so. And so then he mocked the day of Shabbat. And he mocked the aleichem hapanim, the showbread in particular. It's like mocking God. He was exposed at Mount Sinai to the name of God, which represents that reality has nothing, that nothing else exists aside from God. This young man, he reacted in a twisted manner. Interesting, because the aleichem hapanim is kind of twisted, isn't it? I didn't even try that. So he could not relate to his own self-negation. So he applied, listen to this carefully, he complied the concept of the name of God to himself. That's downright scary. He concluded that he was the source of his own self, that his life and his successes and anything and anyone else that stood in his way needed to be obliterated. Wow, does that sound like a group of people here today? People are upset about Hamas. Remember, Hamas means evil. What are they trying to do? They're trying to bring impurity to Israel by the things that they're doing. And for people to disconnect and see that it's even hard to even say that women are being raped, babies mutilated. It's tough. When describing, okay, so essentially remember, God's names are descriptions of him. All right. So this man's final act, this young man's final act, it says, Vayetzi ben Isha Yisraelis. And the son of the Israelite woman went out. Now, the sages explain that he left his world. In other words, he left the true reality, the world of his mother. He entered the illusionary world of his biological father by espousing his poisonous world view. So when it became clear to him that he was not part of the 12 tribes and that he could not camp among them, he arrived at an improper, the wrong decision. He chose not to live with the 12 tribes who negated who negated themselves to the one. All right. The 12 tribes, it wasn't about them. It was about what was in the center of the camp, the ark of the covenant. That's why we're camped around it. They negated themselves. Those that want to create their own camp, they unfortunately, many think that they want to be a part of the middle, but then that means you have to follow the rules, that what's inside of the ark, the Torah, following the Torah. Rather, this young man, he wanted to be the one. He wanted to be, and that all would negate themselves to him. Then he cursed. This was the ultimate challenge. I'm going to finish up, and I'm not even getting to all of it. I'm not even getting to the call to holiness. This is what this is. This is a call to holiness, to negate ourselves, to make it about what's in the middle, what's at the foundation, the ark of the covenant, the Torah, the aleichem hapanim, the Messiah saying, "I am the bread of life." So what he was doing, that was the ultimate challenge to God's sovereignty. Again, people want him to be king of their lives, but they don't want to follow his rules. It's tough. This is why there was no, according to Misha Chachma at Vayikra 24:23, therefore there was no warning necessary before eliminating such an individual from creation. Remember the question, why wasn't there a warning? Let me finish with this. So right after this, right after this unfortunate occurrence, God saw fit to reinforce the clear vision of his kindness, chesed, love for this world. it appears that we are self-sufficient. It does. We do support ourselves by the sweat of our brows. But what God does is he illuminates us once every 7 years during the Shemitah. At that time, we are required to leave the world of the mundane, where we work for our sustenance, and we spend 1 year immersed in the world of God. Our physical needs are miraculously taken care of, as they are essentially happens in the other 6 years as well. Oh, I've got a little bit of time. You don't mind if I go over? Of course not. So let's go back. So we're looking at, so is God too harsh? If you go back to the beginning of what we're talking about here, so you can go back to the beginning of this, it talks about people that are disqualified for certain impurities, why they couldn't come in. Cohen, certain priests couldn't come into the temple, and you, if you were following along, you read it. If you haven't, please go back and read this today. Take the time to study today. This is what Shabbat is all about. It's about studying. All right. So, according to Rabbi Trugman, ultimately, though, the Jewish response to the suffering of others is not to judge them, but to reach out to help them. Only God knows the reasons for all things in an upside down world, a world the sages refer to as a world of lies. That which appears to be a punishment or a curse could be a blessing in disguise. So you may look at these, the Kohen, how they may be disqualified because, you know, the whatever. I'm trying to remember what were some of the disqualifications, you know, like uneven limbs. You know, I have one leg longer than the other. My wife says I don't, and I stand corrected. So indeed, the Jewish tradition insists that everything has a reason and all of God's creations have an ultimate purpose. Furthermore, Judaism insists that all of God's actions are for the benefit of his creations. Clearly, we are not always able to fathom those reasons or the good that must derive from the grim situations we sometimes find ourselves in. But we have faith in God's ultimate goodness. In our case, perhaps the Kohen, the priest, with the physical disability is undergoing some sort of rectification or soul healing by being blessed with this disability. God's apparently strict judgment of this individual is actually tempered by a certain hidden mercy. Again, God is all about mercy. Pardon me. Let me finish up. All right. Going to the 48 Ways book that we've been reading each day. There's something that Rabbi Weinberg talks about, the fear of reality. One of the biggest fears people have, a fear that is crucial to overcome, is the fear of facing up to life's challenges and conflicts. People would rather live in denial than wake up to reality. And again, these things are happening today. They speak to our hearts. Remember, we're talking about character refinement, working our way to Shavuot, working our way to Pentecost, working our way to receiving the Torah. So why aren't people waking up to reality? Because if reality turns out to be something different from what we're used to, it means we have to change, and that makes us uncomfortable. Remember I was talking about people 25, 30, 35, 40 years of repeatedly hearing these things, easy believism, whatever it may be. It's hard to change. So we have to ask the question. Rabbi Weinberg asked the question, how open are you to being shown that you are wrong? True wisdom, when you receive it, means It's like receiving something with an open palm. Only it's your heart. So when wisdom is brought forth to you, you receive it into your heart, and it helps you to make the change. People do not receive that wisdom. They're closed-minded, closed-hearted. They do not receive it. And again, it's unfortunate because people are receiving the same things over and over and over again, and it's hard for them to change. He asks, how open are you to being shown that you are wrong? To hearing that one of your children needs professional help and that the way you are dealing with the situation is ineffective? To being told that you should reach out to an unaffiliated Jewish neighbors on your block by inviting them for a Shabbos meal and offering to learn with them? When we encounter threatening information, our knee-jerk response is to erect a protective wall to deflect it and defend ourselves. I've had some conversations recently. People, they'll deflect. I'll present them with some wisdom, with some truth, with some Bible, and they deflect. Oftentimes it's something of, yeah, do you keep all of the commandments? It's a deflecting thing. We talked about this last week. God said we can do it. We can do it. If he says we can do it, we can do it. He continues on and he says, in psychological parlance, this is called cognitive dissonance. That's like if somebody tells you, hey, water is wet, and you're like, oh, no, it's not. We need to resist the desire to shield ourselves from the facts. We need to resist this desire to shield ourselves from the facts. Don't confuse me with the facts. All right. So no matter how much they upset our equilibrium, because if we bury our heads in the sand, it will hurt a lot more when reality finally confronts us, especially if it is too late to do anything about it. There are many things that people do that they believe, that they hold firm to, that they have a foundation in, that are wrong. But when presented with the truth, they suffer from cognitive dissonance. It's hard to change. It's hard to change. This is why a call to holiness is what we're all about. This is what we're all about. May the Lord bless you and keep you, guard you. May God shine his countenance upon you and be gracious to you. May God turn his countenance toward you and grant you shalom, grant you peace. Adonai orive ishi mimi ira. Adonai me'oz chai mimi echa. Adonai orive ishi